You're listening to The Harmony of We, a space for remembering what we already are together. I'm Greg Kuiper, counselor, author, and fellow traveler in this ongoing field of being human. This podcast isn't about fixing. It's not about getting relationships right. It's about coming into resonance with yourself, with each other, and with the presence that lives in between. This is where the book relationship, The Harmony of We, continues in breath, in story, and in shared awareness. Hello, welcome to another episode of The Harmony of We. Over the last several episodes, we've been exploring what happens after disconnection in a relationship. We've looked at the moments where we miss each other and the courage it takes to return. We've looked at the difficulty of repair and what becomes possible when we remain present, even when things feel uncertain. Those moments when we resist the urge of the autopilot to distract or deflect, withdraw, and we stay in the moment. Last week, Ethan and Maya found themselves sitting together inside one of those unfinished moments. You know, the ones we often find ourselves in. Nothing felt resolved for them, and yet something important was happening. Neither person left emotionally, and neither one of them rushed toward an answer. They simply stayed and sat in that moment of uncertainty together, in that uncomfortable place we are not familiar with. Today, I want to explore something that often happens in those spaces. Something subtle, something deeply human. The stories we begin telling ourselves about what another person's behavior means. Most of us don't respond to reality as much as we think we are. We respond to our interpretation of reality. Think about what that means for a moment. Someone doesn't return a text, and almost instantly a story appears. They're upset with me. They don't care. I'm not important. Someone seems distracted during a conversation, and another story emerges. They're not listening. What I'm saying doesn't matter. They're somewhere else. The mind is incredibly fast, so fast that we often don't notice the difference between what actually happened and the meaning we've attached to it. And once the story forms, we begin relating to the story and not the person. That's where I want to spend some time today, because many of the distances we experience in relationships begin there. Not in the event itself, but in the interpretation. So, it's Wednesday afternoon, a few days after the quiet Saturday morning we spent with Ethan and Maya. The week has settled back into its normal rhythm: work, meetings, errands, schedules, kids. All the responsibilities that make up ordinary life. Maya is finishing up work at her office. The day has been long. Not difficult exactly, but very full for her. The kind of day where her attention has been stretched in 10 different directions. You know the ones. Around noon, she sent Ethan a text. Nothing significant, just a simple message. A picture of a small bookstore she passed during lunch. Underneath it, she wrote, "This place made me think of you." Ethan usually responds quickly, at least lately. But today, nothing. An hour passes, then 2, 3, still nothing. At first, she barely notices, right? But she's busy and really focused, moving through her day. But somewhere in the background, a story begins forming. It's subtle, almost invisible. It's not a conscious decision or something she chooses. It's more like a quiet narrative, slowly gathering momentum. Maybe he's having a busy day. That's the first explanation. And it's a reasonable one. But as more time passes, other possibilities begin appearing and the story evolves. Maybe he saw it and didn't think it mattered. Maybe he's slipping back into old habits. Maybe that conversation we had in the car didn't really mean anything. The mind is remarkable this way. Given enough uncertainty, it will almost always create an explanation. And once the explanation begins, our emotions follow. By the time Maya leaves work, she's carrying something she wasn't carrying earlier. Not certainty and not facts, just a feeling, a slight disappointment, a subtle withdrawal, a faint sense of being alone. And what's fascinating is that none of this came from an actual interaction. It came from an interpretation, an explanation created in her mind, the story. And the story has begun shaping her experience. There's not anything dramatic going on, and it's not enough to create conflict, but it is enough to affect the space she will bring home with her. Meanwhile, Ethan is having a completely different experience. Around noon, when Maya's text arrived, he was walking into a meeting. He glanced at the message and he smiled, and he intended to respond after the meeting. Then the meeting ran long. Another issue emerged, and his afternoon shifted unexpectedly. And before he realized it, hours had passed. The thought of Maya's message crossed his mind several times. Each time he would think, "Oh, I'll respond in a minute." And then another interruption and another task, more demand on his attention. Now, driving home, he remembers and he feels bad. Not because the message wasn't important, because it was. What makes relationships fascinating is that two entirely different experiences can be unfolding simultaneously. Maya's experience, maybe I'm not important. Ethan's experience, I know she knows I appreciate that message. Neither person is intentionally creating distance, and yet distance is beginning to form. And this distance isn't being created by what happened, but from what each person believes happened. That evening, Maya is sitting on the porch when Ethan gets home. The sun is beginning to set. The air carries that familiar end of day stillness. He notices her immediately and walks over. He leans down and kisses her forehead. And almost instantly, he senses something. It's not conflict and not really tension, and just kind of a distance, slight, but there. A few months ago, he probably would have ignored it or become defensive about it. But he's been learning to pay attention, learning that the space between people often speaks more than words. He sits down beside her, and after a few moments, asks gently, "How was your day?" She shrugs slightly. "It was okay." And there it is, that tiny shift. The difference between an answer and an opening. For a moment, Ethan feels uncertain. Then something occurs to him. Oh, he laughs softly. The bookstore. Maya looks over. I completely forgot to respond. There's no defensiveness in his voice, just recognition, no explanation. And something immediately changes because now reality is entering the room, not the story, but the reality. I actually loved that you sent it, he says. I saw it right before a meeting and kept meaning to write back. Maya feels something loosening inside her. Not because her story was unreasonable, but because it wasn't complete. It was built from limited information, and now a larger picture is emerging. This is one of the quiet challenges of relationship. We are constantly filling in missing information. We don't know why someone looked away, so we create a reason. We don't know what their silence means, so we interpret it. We don't know what's happening internally, so the mind completes the story. And often, the stories we create reveal as much about our own fears as they do about the other person. If we fear abandonment, we may interpret distance where none exists. If we fear rejection, we may find evidence for it quickly. If we fear not mattering, small moments can begin carrying enormous meaning. This doesn't mean we're broken. We're simply human. You may know this experience intimately. Perhaps you've waited for a message or a call, some kind of response. And you've noticed how quickly the mind begins constructing explanations. What's remarkable is how convincing these stories can feel. Right away, the body responds and emotions rise. This leads to changes in behavior, and this happens all before we've actually verified what is true. And once we begin creating and reacting to the story, the relationship often starts responding to it as well. The distance becomes real, even if the original assumption wasn't. Back to our couple. As they sit together on the porch, Maya smiles slightly. I think I told myself about 6 different stories this afternoon. Ethan laughs. Only 6? She laughs too. The first genuine laugh of the evening. And in that moment, something beautiful happens. Neither person is wrong, and they are not blaming one another. They're simply becoming aware of how easily stories form. They are understanding how quickly assumptions shape experience and how much suffering can come from meanings we never intended. Perhaps the goal isn't to stop creating stories. That's probably impossible. The mind is designed to make meaning. I think the practice is becoming aware that we're doing it. To notice the moment when interpretation begins. To ask ourselves in those moments, what do I actually know? What am I assuming? What else might be true? Not doing this as a technique, but as a form of presence, a willingness to remain curious long enough for reality to reveal itself. So maybe this week you notice the stories that arise, not wanting to judge them or eliminate them, but simply to become aware of them. See if you can notice the meanings that appear automatically, those conclusions that arrive quickly, too quickly, the assumptions that feel true before they're verified, and gently ask yourself, what else could be happening here? Because sometimes the greatest distance in relationship isn't created by another person. It's created by the story we unknowingly begin living inside. Connection often deepens when we become curious. We don't have to be certain. Curious enough to question the story and remain open, and curious enough to allow another possibility to emerge. And in that openness, we give each other a chance to be who we actually are, not who our fears imagine us to be. Remember, healing begins in the space between us. May you walk in the harmony of we. See you next time.